Okay, Darren, we are finally back together again. SoCon Fast Break. I know it's been a minute in midst of the summer tour. So we'll have another episode to really talk about everything that's happened with the summer tour. And we've missed you on the summer tour, but
Yeah.
it's just been craziness from a scheduling standpoint. You moving to Charlotte, all of that. So that's a big part of it as far as why you haven't been seen on the summer tour, but you're still a big part of SoCon Fast Break. And so right now, I mean, we have to talk about what's happened in the past 72 hours here in college athletics with the various lawsuits and the big news that hit, of course, on Friday in Colorado and the Judge Charlotte Sweeney talking about the injunction. So catch us up on everything. I mean, you are the law degree guy. You got your law degree, so I'm going to go right to the lawyer. So catch us up on everything that's happened right now and how this might impact teams here in the Southern Conference in all of college athletics, of course, mid-major basketball.
Yeah, I mean, Friday night, I started getting blown up. I mean, it was just chaos when this order came out. But essentially where we're at right now is, to give a quick synopsis on this new 5-for-5 rule the NCAA has instituted, is that you now no longer have 4 years to compete. You have 5 years to compete. And it's from the start of one of two things. It's when you either first enroll in a collegiate institution or the year after you turn 19, if you choose to prep or go to prep school. And so what that did, though, is the NCAA, when they instituted this rule, they did not make it retroactive. So what that means in plain terms is that the class of 2022, the guys that just exhausted their 4 years of eligibility, were not part of this new rule. So they had exhausted their eligibility. So some lawsuits started popping up, one of which was in the Colorado District Court, which is a federal court in Colorado, which is why this also has a nationwide appeal and also nationwide consequences, is that Friday night, Judge Sweeney issued a temporary injunction, which basically means that she is pausing the enforcement of the new 5-for-5 rule while the lawsuit proceeds. So, accordingly, those student athletes that graduated high school in 22 and began their eligibility in the 2022-23 academic year have now been granted an additional year of eligibility. But this isn't without caveats, right? So, as of right now, you have that year of eligibility. The problem is the NCAA expects to appeal this. Everyone is anticipating that they will appeal this. They essentially doubled down on their decision a couple weeks ago, saying that they were not going to allow this rule to apply retroactively when a lot of these lawsuits started popping up. Essentially saying, like, we're going to dig our heels in on this one, and we're willing to pay some legal bills here because this is just what we want to do. So
we're going to spend a lot of money on this.
Yeah. And I had talked to some people that had talked to some folks in the know that thought, you know what? They thought that the NCAA might just come out and say, you know what, we don't want to spend the legal fees on this. We are just going to let this class and this class only get their fifth year and call it a day. Obviously, that has not happened to date, and it doesn't appear that it's going to. So, if this gets appealed, which we anticipate it will, the appellate court will likely look at this pretty quickly, given the ramifications of it. And they have three options on this appeal. One, they can uphold the Judge Sweeney's decision, and therefore these guys will be eligible until the conclusion of the lawsuit or settlement, which, if we get past this appeal phase, presume that these guys will be able to play a season probably before this thing gets figured out. Or there'd be a settlement that the NCAA just says, hey, okay, now we're 0 for 2 on this. We've lost in the district court. We lost on the appeal of this injunction. We got to figure out a way to kind of cut our losses. The second is the appellate court can modify Judge Sweeney's decision. And the third prong is that they could pause the preliminary injunction, which would mean these guys then would become ineligible again. And so the lawsuit would then continue. So everything's up in the air right now. It's chaos. I'm sure you've seen it, and anyone that's listening to this has seen a bunch of guys jump in the portal. And, this obviously has an impact that I'm sure we'll discuss a little bit more here at the mid-major level. And, it's tough if you're sitting in the shoes of a head coach right now, because there are some good players out there, whether it's the mid-major level, low major level, or high major level, that could benefit from this, and frankly, some rosters that could ultimately benefit this. But we just don't know exactly what's going to happen. And you and I were talking about this earlier today. Like, everyone's summer season is over. Like, their summer practice session's over. So you're bringing somebody in that didn't get to build camaraderie and learn the system in the summer, and you've got to drop them in now. If a player's good enough, most coaches will overlook that. But it's certainly going to have an impact of how do you want to handle this if you're a coaching staff, and frankly a university, because it's going to cost money, obviously, to get these guys. And so where's your NIL budget at right now?
Yeah, no, I would agree 1,000%. And I'm still just curious, why did the NCAA just not go ahead and grandfather that class in 2022? Because this seems to be the only one that's based on all of the other classes that have been out there. And again, I know you can talk about, hey, life isn't fair, and at some point you got to, stop. You can't just continue to give everybody extra eligibility. Right. And I do understand that, but it does seem right now that this class is impacted significantly, where the NCAA, you could just come right in and just grandfather them in. I'm just looking at it just from a practical standpoint. Just grandfather them in and move on. That's it.
Yeah, when you really look at this thing holistically, right, the 2022-23 class is going to be the only class that doesn't get that fifth year when we're talking about the COVID guys, right? Because the guys before they got the additional COVID year. And then prospectively, guys that are going into their senior year this year will then get the additional year. So that 2022-2023 class was the only class that wasn't getting anything. And I am in complete agreement with you on your comment of, at some point we do have to understand life isn't fair, because that's just the reality. But if you look at this holistically, it would have been so simple just to say, look, you're the only class that's not getting an additional year. We're going to grandfather this one class in, and you're going to get one more year, and then we're done. We'd have no litigation. We would have rosters that were able to plan accordingly, and we just wouldn't have this chaos right now. And it just doesn't. It boggles my mind, some of these decisions that come from the NCAA, where, look, I'm sure one of their arguments is probably that it would have a really detrimental impact on high school seniors. I'm sure that's one of the main arguments. I don't know it, but that would be my guess, is one of them.
Yeah, no, I think Charlie Baker's already come out in his statement and said that, basically, that it would impact those high school seniors, because you would have these quote unquote failed professionals trying to come back in and get an extra year of eligibility, which I think is just so short-sighted on the NCAA's part. But when have we not seen the NCAA at times be short-sighted?
And it's just wild, because look, I mean, Charlie Baker's a really smart guy. He's a former politician. He's a former college athlete. Like, this is a guy that's been in this sort of, world for a long time. And I just don't understand why the NCAA didn't think about, hey, this is probably coming, and we may lose here. We don't necessarily have a good argument. We know that if we don't apply this retroactively, there's going to be litigation, right? I just don't think it would have had that big of an impact on the high school class for what it's causing now and the chaos that it's going to bring. For what it's causing now.
That's right. Yes. And I just question the NCAA's legal counsel that they didn't provide that type of input to say, hey, you know what? Don't worry about winning this battle. We've got a bigger war that we're focusing on. So here, we're willing to give this up, because it wouldn't have hurt them that much to give up and allow that class to be grandfathered in. It just wouldn't.
No, I don't have the statistics. I'm sure in today's world there's some data on it, but I find it hard to believe that it would have that big of an impact on high school seniors. If you're good enough, somebody's going to find you and somebody's going to have a roster spot for you. And guess what?
That's right.
We live in an era where almost everybody's only playing at 1 year at a school anyway. So maybe the kid goes a little bit below his level because there's not a higher level scholarship available for him or whatever the case may be. But he's going to have a roster spot somewhere. And, the portal will work its way out after this year. I just don't think it would have had that major of an impact where you're talking about a large number of high school seniors that were not going to have opportunities to play college basketball. Yeah. And now you're in a situation where you really have egg on your face and you have lost again in court.
Yes, but it does put these coaches in a very tough situation in terms of, do you really proceed forward, especially with the lawsuit in Colorado? And now, though, the other side of it is, though, there's been other lawsuits, but it's been state specific as far as, some of these that have been filed. And one of them was filed in Ohio. Yeah. And Tom House was included in that. And he was given that injunction to restore his eligibility. Now, I don't know if that means he's going to come back to Furman or anything of that nature as of yet, or what it might lay out to be. But there's also one that was just filed in North Carolina, and that does include some former players in the Southern Conference, Donovan Atwell and Kenyon Giles there that, now, of course, they've moved on with Atwell at Texas Tech and Kenyon there at Wichita State. But are they going to have an opportunity? Now, there hasn't been a ruling on that one yet, but for Tom's case there, that has been ruled in their favor, all those athletes that were included in that. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, on the state level, are those a little bit more stable in terms of, hey, if you're a coach, those players involved, I'd feel more comfortable putting them on my roster than the situation with the Colorado TRO, because that one's going to be appealed. And the NCAA's come out and said, hey, we're appealing this. And so I would be less likely just those ones that are, a blanket, type of situation. And, an example that I'd be thinking of, a former player in the Southern Conference, Justin Bailey, played at Wofford, who just finished up his eligibility at Georgia, So technically now he's included in that one in Colorado, but I don't know if I would be actively pursuing some of those type of players at this moment. Yes, of course, making some phone calls, trying to maybe line up some things, but I think if you had to tiptoe around that type of situation right now, just based on see what's going to happen with the appeals process.
Yeah, and look, you bring up a great point, because the reality is that this lawsuit in Colorado was in federal court. And one of the reasons I brought that up earlier is because typically, federal law and a ruling from a federal court is going to trump a state court ruling. In other words, essentially, if the federal court says, hey, you get your extra year of eligibility if you were part of the 22-23 freshman class, that's going to impact another state's lawsuit whereby a lawsuit was, for instance, like you mentioned, North Carolina, that was brought in state court. But you bring up an interesting point of that, in that this federal case is going to be appealed. The state law, the state court matter can still proceed differently, right? And so the federal court ultimately will trump the state court ruling if this injunction ultimately is upheld. So that will have an impact on the North Carolina guys and the Ohio guys and these other state lawsuits. But if for some reason this is overturned, well, you can still pursue your state law matters. So, you bring up a really interesting point of, do you have, do you feel more comfortable with some of these state law claims? I think in answering that, it's a really high burden when you get granted a preliminary injunction by a court, without getting too much into the legalese of it. You have to satisfy a pretty high burden. And generally speaking, they are hard to overcome on appeal. If you win at the injunction stage, they're hard to get overturned. So, I think I would feel pretty confident in that injunction holding up, but I don't want to make a prediction or speculation because you never know. But I think I would feel equally as good. Obviously, guys that have already been awarded that additional year in state court, I'd feel better about those guys because that's already progressed far enough. If you've got something pending in state court, if this injunction were overturned at the federal level, then I'd be a little bit more concerned because then now you've given the state court the roadmap where they could potentially deny injunctive relief. And so if something's already been granted, I would feel better about it if I were a coach. But I think if stuff is still pending, whether it's state or federal, I'm feeling pretty good because of the burden that you have to meet. But you're rolling the dice. Absolutely rolling the dice.
Yeah, and I think there's also what you talked about previously too, is that these rosters for a lot of the mid-majors, at least, they're pretty set.
Yeah, they are.
And they don't have a whole lot of room, based on the financial situation also. And I'm even curious, how many players would really fit into this category. And I think you and I, we're looking around. Brian Taylor II at ETSU might be really the only one that, and of course we know Tom House, but in terms of the guys that fit that criteria, graduated high school in 2022, and then have started their playing career there in 2022, that 2022-23 season, and have exhausted 4 years of eligibility. So Brian Taylor II does seem to fit that criteria, but does ETSU really have a spot open for him? Or does he want to try to go in the transfer portal, whatever that might be? Again, I think there's so many gray areas right now. It's very difficult for these mid-majors because, again, you just got done with all your summer workouts. Not to say that, that not everybody, like some of the international guys, like even, at VMI that they're signing, they haven't been able to work out with the team just because of trying to get their visas set, all of that. But I don't know. It's going to be difficult for these coaches to try to construct a roster without knowing definitively, do they have a spot and can they create a spot, so to speak?
Yeah, I think what my gut leans is that if you had a guy that you thought would potentially be getting an extra year of eligibility, like a guy like Tom House, like you mentioned, I think if you're a coaching staff that semi-saved a spot for a guy like that, I think you're in a position right now where you have prepared for that, and so it's going to be a lot easier. But I think at the mid-major level, particularly obviously the Southern Conference falling squarely within that, if you didn't save a roster spot for somebody, I think it's going to be really hard because a lot of these guys that are seeking that additional year, they're probably I shouldn't say all of them, but a lot of them are going to demand a pretty fair amount of money because these are guys that probably, look, Brian Taylor II had a really good year last year. That's not to say he wouldn't come back to ETSU, but those numbers suggest he could probably go out and get a significant more amount of money at the high major level. So I think the mid-majors are in a really weird spot right now in that they kind of understand, like, for the most part, we need to have our roster set because we got to go build that. And we know that we have less flexibility financially. So where I think this ultimately will really impact a lot of these guys is if these guys are going to make jumps to the high major level or guys that were already playing at the high major level, because they just have so much more flexibility than most mid-majors in the country. And we all know that not everybody fits into the same box in that.
That's right.
But I think this is I think you're rolling the dice here if you're a mid-major program that didn't really kind of carve out, hey, we feel pretty good about this guy's ability to get an additional year, so we're going to save this spot for you, and we're going to allot your NIL amount there, and we feel good about our roster if for some reason it doesn't work out. So I think it's really hard for the mid-majors. I think right now navigating these waters, especially with the unknowns.
No question. Yeah. And I think right now you probably just being in a holding pattern is probably the smartest thing I think a lot of these coaches can do at this point. But we'll keep everybody posted once we get some more information, all of those things that are happening. But right now, you can go check out the Summer Tour series, all of the episodes that we've released so far. Make sure you check out YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and we've got more episodes coming up this summer. And hey, I know it's only the 1st of August, and you might have college football, you might have NFL on your mind, but get ready. College basketball is going to be starting pretty soon.
Sir.
So make sure you hit that subscribe button, SoCon Fast Break. Until next time, may all your jumpers hit nothing but the bottom of the net.